Okay, without further ado, let's welcome Josh Penzell, VP of AI Services here at ELB Learning, and Ryan Allenbach, CEO of Agreed.io. Josh, the webinar stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Hello, everyone. It's great to see the folks on and some familiar names as well, and folks from some great places, my hometown being one. I'll let you figure out which one that is. So I'm Josh Penzell, VP of AI Services here at ELB Learning. I'm going to just introduce very quickly my good friend and colleague, Ryan Allenbach, who uh, works is the co-founder of Agreed,
Hey guys.
which has sort of a, I don't want to toot your horn, but as 20 years of experience working at some of the big consulting firms, creating some change management initiatives. And you were many people don't know this, right? But in your early 20s, if I'm correct, you were a professional bodybuilder. Was that right?
I mean,
Over
I
in
like to keep that under wraps.
yeah,
Now with
yeah,
6X Dad, it's transformational in different ways.
yeah.
Thanks for
I
highlighting that, Josh.
No, it's good. I mean, I know if I almost competed in the world championships, except for an injury right at the end there, I would want to talk about it. Um, anyway, just a little fun to get us all going this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're just going to get right into this. Um, First thing to, I don't know, think through, and we'll just pull this up. Can everyone see my screen? I realize can you guys see this with this, oops. Can you see this in the Google thing? Because I want this
The
to be
thumbs
full
up from
screen.
Michelle.
Oh, all right, we'll
Thank
just keep
you.
it like this. No problem. All right,
We can get
78% of your employees are using AI at work, whether you know it or not. This is according to Stanford. Now, this was in 2023 at the end there, and before some of you either start, coming down my throat and saying, "Wait a minute, you're not talking about this correctly," right? This is many different forms of AI here, right? So, machine learning, we remember that. That's when, in the 90s, things started coming out. If you've ever had Netflix and those recommendations, spam filters, does anyone remember before we had those, right? So that has always been there and is there. That's not what really we're talking about, right? We're sort of getting to this next part, this deep learning. When we get from machine learning to deep learning, what we're talking about is the idea that machines can start to learn from themselves. In some ways, we're creating these neural pathways, actually. They're creating them just like we have. And that's where we started getting stuff like uh, natural language processing, the ability for, right? I don't want to say their names, but these, because then they'll wake up and talk to me, but all of these things to start talking to us and listening to us. And then right at the end of, or heck, about a year and a half ago now, it's crazy. We had this, or 2 years ago almost, we had this really massive thing come out, which was Chat GPT. And the difference here between all the learning models is all of a sudden we have something that can create brand new stuff. And not only that, but we had a form of generative AI that came out, right? That let us talk to it in our language or your language. And so suddenly, this idea of using AI at work became a whole different thing, right? And by the way, this is the major change that's going on right now. So how are we thinking about that? One thing is concern and worry, right? But I don't think we need to be worried. Um, According to the McKinsey Global Institute, 60% of jobs have automatable tasks. Only 30% of those tasks are automatable, though. So we're not looking at, and by the way, only 5% of jobs can be fully automated. So while there will be some change in the economy and there will be some change, that change is not necessarily going to be a great um, uh, productivity sort of optimization change where suddenly we're going to be laying off people because they no longer uh, operate. We don't need them unless they're part of that 5%. What we're looking at is a complete transformation of how we work, who works, and that's the change we need to grapple with in an organizational sense. I think other folks, by the way, are seeing this as we need to invest, not cut. Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, maybe the company that sort of everyone's talking about because of the AI chips. He says we have 32,000 employees today, but someday we want to have 50,000 employees and 100 million AI assistants. So what he's saying is instead of reducing spend, reducing cost, cutting and rethinking the organization that way, he's suggesting that actually it's going to allow him to make more investments. And then he'll invest not only in more people, but more AI. So he sees the whole thing as actually both sides getting bigger. And I think this is a little counter to the narrative that's going on right now. Everyone expects, and here's what C-suite expects, right? That AI is going to boost productivity. 96%, obviously, which is going to put more demands on those workers, right? 37% more output, different skill sets. I need to have more responsibilities. But if we really think about this in our organizations, and we think about this from the other side, the reality is people don't know how to get productivity. If we look at the bottom there, and not only that, uh, they find it's decreasing productivity. So why would someone like Jensen Huang be doubling down on this? Given that it's not just right, he's not just hiring more AI, he's saying he's going to hire more people. So what's going on here? And by the way, if we're thinking about the change that this is going to cause in our organizations and how we normally would deal with this in a technology approach, I want you to look at that top right area, employee reality. Normally, we rely on the youngest generations in our workforce to help informally train up. Look at the burnout that Gen Z is reporting versus the millennials and Gen X. And by the way, this could open up a whole other conversation about perspective, right, and work and all that stuff. But putting that aside, you already have a generation burnt out. And now imagine all of the other ways now with AI and Gen AI, we have the ability to either help them get past that or how we are actually, and I think most organizations will do this, going to pressure that more. And if you think about the next generation, the generation that's literally using AI in school, in their work right now, and will come for that as an expectation, I think this burnout is going to do something interesting. And I think we're going to hit on what that is because it's not just this fact of using AI, right? It could be the frustration of not being able to use it, not knowing how to use it. And now that I am using it and can start to develop all sorts of amazing ideas, how do I feel like I'm giving back? Where do I think the value, that I bring in the organization is? So I think this whole thing we need to look at differently. This is not about productivity. For me, AI is not a new tool, it's a new hire. Now, obviously, it's technology, so I'm not trying to say, let's treat it like a human that actually exists. But in our mindset, we need to think of this differently. This is not about productivity. This is not about optimizing, because those things, right, are about doing the same thing that we're already doing faster, stronger, etc. What Jensen Huang and all these folks are saying, and what I think we're starting to uncover here, is this is about providing more value. And if I think about myself as hiring, then I can think of the AI as something that can provide value even when it doesn't have the right inputs. But I can also think about this as a tool is the same no matter who has it. And all you're trying to do is use the tool. But this is different, right? This is more like a human. In fact, it's trained to mimic humans. And I think what we start to see and what we can imagine is this world where every single person who has access to this technology essentially begins to hire assistants, all sorts of assistants. And the reason this isn't about productivity is because they can talk back and forth with their AI coach or their AI specialist or their AI developer immediately. It also means um, that they have more control over their work. And by the way, that's a good thing. Microsoft did a study and they find that the people who use AI say their work is more enjoyable, they feel more motivated, and it boosts their creativity. Those are all things we want. Those are all things that get great ideas. But here's the question is everyone now has that, every single one of your employees, every single one of your clients. So how are you going to make use of that? Because everyone's going to see productivity gains from this, right? In fact, we're already seeing that happen. I love this. Pennsylvania, right? Government, they were doing a pilot. And at the end of that pilot, they asked folks, hey, the last time you used AI, how much time did you use it? And how much time did it save? And the self-reporting was it saved 105 minutes per day. That's an hour 45 minutes. And if you see what they're using it for, none of it to me is about it replacing them. It's all stuff they're focused on that is actually allowing them to get to a better result, but not necessarily faster, right? Brainstorming, I can do a lot of that very quickly, but that takes time normally. So is the idea that now I'm doing it less or actually that I can do more of it? All of this is to say the whole organization is changing and this is getting rolled out because of all these facts and it's a good thing. But what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to manage this? Because everything I just said, your mind might be going, I don't even understand it. It's a million things. There's a bunch of facts. Yeah. So what are we going to do with it? And I want to show you what I think the workplace of the future could be and will be, which is something like this. And I want to point out, I've put AI in many different roles on this. An assistant, a personal sort of assistant, your own, right? A whole team, a team member. But the one that I think we all need to really start focusing on is that line all the way at the bottom. All of our ICs who suddenly can now hire 10 to 20 assistants, AI assistants, right? And by the way, if we want to think about the hiring of them, and go back to thinking of it as this technology and this tool, they're creating those en masse. They're hiring en masse and it costs them nothing. And it's even saving you time. How are you going to benefit from that? How are you going to leapfrog your customers if they have the same technology every one of your employees has? You have to use some sort of collective wisdom. We have to figure out how to create a new environment, create new mechanisms for our organizations, because the change methodologies we have from the past, they still make sense, but they're not prepared for the rapid onslaught that's about to occur. And I want to pass this over now to my colleague, unless there are any questions that are pressing, Kristen. I want to pass this on to my colleague Ryan, because I want him to talk about, on the other end, I'm talking about the AI disruption. I want him to break down how this is working at an organizational level, and then what are some mechanisms we can use to solve it.
At this moment, we
Kristen,
do not have any questions in our wonderful Q&A bubble, but that's not to say that people can't pop on over there and put anything in there that they would like, and we can address it a little bit later.
perfect. And the question might just be, what the heck is he talking about? So, Ryan, why don't you take it from there?
You got it. I'm gonna take over the screen share, and for a moment, I'm gonna tell you a story about my childhood. I I grew up, my dad worked in arena management. At the time, it was like the most glorious job in industry, at least among all the teens at my high school, because I got to go see some really crazy events. I mean, monster trucks and motocross to Disney on Ice to sporting events, but I got to see some really cool concerts. And I'd love to hear in the chat your favorite concert that you've ever been to and why. But I want you to think in that moment when you were there, were you up close? Were you seeing the sweat on the performers' faces and seeing the pick and the skill and dexterity they're using or in the drum kit? Were you maybe on the other end? Were you sitting up in the nosebleeds uh, like I did when my favorite band came to town and I was taking a girl out and had to buy my own tickets? Thanks, Dad. But sometimes you're even backstage. The point is, there are a lot of different perspectives, and these perspectives, whether it's up close seeing the action, whether it's a broad view, and mind you, that nosebleed seat, executives like to say that they're seeing things from 20,000 or 30,000 feet, right? In the stadium, that's the cheap seats. But there is a tremendous value from seeing the inner workings, how the concert and event is coming together, how the people are performing on stage, and even the broader picture. So, to what Josh is talking about, how can we absorb change as quickly as AI is changing? Just take a moment, be honest with yourself. How quickly can my organization absorb the onslaught, the tsunami of change that is coming? So, we're going to talk about the reality. Change is painful. Medium to highly complex organizations, most people don't appreciate the value of a good idea and the rigor it takes to get it done. And if you think about it, the go-to tactics we've relied on in the past, the recurring meeting, the splintered communication threads, even the world's best deck is helpful, but swagger, ego, and politics often carry the day. And if we look at digital transformation as a proxy, it's really painful and underwhelming when we're missing expectations. So we're going to dive into our observations about organizational capacity for change. And we're going to talk about it along two different spectrums. So specialized context, as well as decision-making authority. This isn't going to be rocket science. It's going to feel intuitive. Unfortunately, and fortunately, it's all going to be lived experience for you. But we're going to look at it along the hierarchical or the corporate hierarchy and seniority, from individual contributors in those early in their career on up through senior executives. Our assertion is that by focusing on some of these insights, that you will have actionable takeaways that you can take back to your organizations and dramatically influence the trajectory you have for adopting AI and other change. As we look at, well, first of all, I love Dolly and Peter Gabriel, those comments. Thanks, guys, for sharing. So as we look at specialized context, what we're thinking about here is how close to the nitty-gritty details am I? So there's kind of an uptick as people are starting to get some early skills in their career. Then, as we expect, as you get promoted and you start climbing that corporate ladder, by virtue of delegation and the natural evolution of how you operate an organization, you can no longer be connected to how things operate. It's not a surprise. Now, um, in our earlier context, we're talking about individual contributors, frontline managers early in the career. They're actually really close to the stage, maybe even part of the band. They are literally the nuts and bolts of how this is developing. As you climb the corporate ladder, you are getting higher and higher, and you have a broader perspective of how things are happening. And like I said, this is normal and good. This is good management, and delegation matters. As we think about decision-making authority, again, this is not rocket science, but as you increase your scope of responsibility, the more decision-making authority you have. And again, as we think about perspective, that matters. But what it means is that we have people, as we overlay these two, we have people making decisions. The highest decision making authority literally has the lowest specialized context of anyone in the organization, and vice versa. We assert that this part below both of these is the organizational capacity for change. And if you're going to question it, I want you to put yourself in any one of these roles. You may have some really great ideas, but you don't have power to impact the change. You may have a lot of power on the other end of the spectrum, but you don't have that much ability to get it in wheel change. So let's talk about how this manifests itself when you think about something like AI. These folks who are earlier in their careers, as Josh said, they come with native experience. They've been using AI in school to do lots of different assignments. They're going to have really great ideas for use cases and how they've seen all of their friends do it, how they're bringing it from what they've learned in school or other opportunities or exposures that they've had. They literally have no clue how to build a business case, how to navigate the halls and get stakeholders to weigh in. They lack organizational context for who would be impacted by larger scale change.
And Ryan, can I add
Yeah,
there?
please.
Yeah, they are also the least motivated to share if they are using AI or whatever to speed up, right? Or to enhance or to make better their work, especially if AI is not currently allowed, right? So I just point out this
Absolutely.
isn't a future state. And not only are they the least motivated to share, they are also the most motivated to use because there's the most upside for them because they have the least decision making, right? And the most knowledge.
Yeah, I love it. Let's jump to the other end of the spectrum where you have senior executives or high decision-making authority. They want to make decisions, they want to drop knowledge, they are craving use cases. But think about their perspective. How can they compare this onslaught of use cases coming at them? How can they have confidence as to which of these use cases will actually work? I've heard this, the middle section often described as the frozen middle, and that feels a little derogatory, but I'm I'm empathetic because similar to who has motivation to share, do I share, stand out, and um, like the choice that they have is if I start adopting AI and it gives me personal efficiency, should I keep riding that and I'm now a shining star? Or do I share an idea and then have somebody else, risk taking credit for my idea and the value I'm creating? There is, in this kind of middle section of the organization, they have enough experience where they have probably tried changing the organization in some way. They are most likely to have learned helplessness or feelings of questioning if the organization is actually listening. Think about how many surveys we take, and it is literally survey fatigue of sharing my thoughts and not having a closed loop where there's action being taken. So, admittedly, engaging this middle section on incentivizing them to share and finding a balance between how can I reward who gets to keep the credit, the company or you as, personally.
Ryan, can I just also reflect? This is something. This is you're talking in a macro, but this can also happen and is happening in the micro within the teams. I mean, and learners. I just thought when you were saying surveys, and I'm frustrated nothing ever happens. How many level 1 surveys do we in what we used to call smile sheets ask? How much data do we collect and not do anything? How frustrated do I, as a frontline manager, or I'm sorry, a frontline instructional designer, learning developer, have that I'm never able to communicate to my executives that I can help them actually achieve the gains they want if they would just let me do my job, which I'm sure some of this might sound familiar to those of us who have been doing this for a while. So I just wanted to this to me, it can feel so broad, but it's actually is very personal as well. Right? I think that just
Totally.
contextualizes it and makes it this can feel almost abstract, and it's not abstract.
Absolutely.
It's here. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very human element and it's an individual experience because these are jobs and lives that are being, um, that are impacted by decisions. So, question is, how do we grow our capacity for change? There's really two shifts that I'm going to outline. First, how can we increase the overall line up and down the spectrum? And second is, how do we close the gap? So if you think about that highest and lowest point, whatever it looks like in your organization, how can we change the other end to modify the slope and effectively close the gap? So I'm going to go through these a little quick and we'll get to some real life stories and application. But what we're talking about here is if you think about um, specialized context, like you mentioned, AI tools, cross functional experiences can literally allow every level of the organization to be closer to the details and not have to work harder. Literally having agents surrounding them that can accelerate conversations. If you think about shrinking the gap, what that means on the senior executives or the higher decision making end is that they need greater visibility into what AI opportunities exist. They need to have greater trust systems for cross-functional vetting. So when the AI tool or whatever change opportunity there is crosses party lines and goes from operations to HR or over to finance and legal, they need to have trust that they are being appropriately vetted. And not that they will provide real-time feedback, but having the opportunity and mechanisms and forums where they have access will dramatically increase their specialized context. If you think about decision-making authority, it's hard to imagine the whole organization having a step shift. But because I've seen it, I know that having an established or clarified process and common language around how new initiatives are considered, having an apples to apples comparison of opportunities. So this dramatically helps people know what's going to be expected. How are we going to talk about it? And frankly, a platform to facilitate the process. Josh, to me, this sounds like kind of like the beginnings of your Amazon experience. Maybe you want to touch on that for a second?
I mean, yeah. Well, when I was at Amazon, I think it was 500,000 employees worldwide, and I was launching. I was there right as the Alexa products, and if she talks to me, so if you hear that in the background, sorry. That was always fun during interviews, by the way. I would say, about my job history, and then that would. But there are so many ideas, and you are taught at Amazon very specific mechanisms, right, in order to allow this whole thing to sort of work more efficiently. So all these things that Ryan is talking about, there's a mechanism in place to do that at Amazon, and it's essentially through writing papers. And I can talk a little bit. Ryan, do you want me to talk more about that right
Well, I
now?
think let's pause on a minute. But the point is that the best companies in the world have systems and processes for communicating in a consistent manner up and down the organization. And because it is known, it literally increases the decision-making authority for everyone.
And these were called, if you look, these were mechanisms. If you talk to someone from Amazon, they'll talk about mechanisms, and that is what this was. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not only a step shift for everyone, but there's an opportunity again to shrink the gap where broader participation happens from the ICs, early career folks, the frontline managers, when they can actually participate and they feel a deeper sense of ownership and connection and therefore accountability for what happens because they are putting in the assumptions, they are owning the risks, and as a result it dramatically increases the likelihood of success. So when we talk about ROI on a business case or return on investment on a business case, having folks up and down the chain be involved in the creation of that dramatically increases outcomes. So visually, we're talking about increasing decision making across the board, increasing specialized context, and therefore having a dramatically larger capacity for change. So hey, let's just like put it together in a summary. How do we do this? Greater visibility into new ideas. We are talking about solving communication gaps. We're sharing AI efficiency gains. We're incentivizing sharing versus keeping to themselves. We're giving greater responsibility for broader participation, increasing ownership and accountability. It's just a few things. This feels admittedly Herculean, if not impossible. So, what we are asserting is that you need a mechanism that enables employee led change. We're going to reveal this mechanism, but the mechanism literally collapses the friction that organizations feel by having everyone learn how to navigate it on their own. Think about the first time you took a change initiative through your organization. What are the lessons that you learned? It's as simple as the voice you speak in, who you need to talk to, the right sequence and order that are often institutional memories that are cultural, they're not written down and documented. That happens line by line and often failure by failure that you're tweaking and getting things ready for the next time. And what we are asserting is that having a mechanism will dramatically accelerate the
And
volume of throughput, especially when you think about AI coming.
yeah, and you have developed, a way to package this mechanism yourself, right? And that's, where Agreed comes in. And the mechanism isn't, just to be clear, a mechanism is not a piece of software. It is a way of thinking. It is an approach. It is an action. Another mechanism, for instance, could be a sentence, right? At Amazon, they could have been something like, be frugal. That was a mechanism in that it was a way of thinking about stuff. My saying AI is not a new tool, it is a new hire, is a mechanism for thinking about AI. And so I think what's really exciting about this mechanism, Ryan, is it's based on some of these best practices, right? Anyone can do it. And we're about to enter a point where it will almost become even that mechanism, right? We'll need to start adjusting. And that's what's exciting is that we can do that.
Yeah, should we dive into what the
Yeah,
process looks like, the mechanism? If you're
let's do
going
it.
to talk about change initiatives and how they happen, this is what we've observed over the last 20 years, over 500,000 approved and executed business cases. This practice, whether it's named different things or not, you will see that it feels really familiar. And it's the recipe that matters, but navigating through this process, we'll talk about some gotchas. But frankly, let's start at the beginning. How are you capturing ideas in pitch, inviting ideas from anywhere? You know, best run companies will actually bring together cross-functional groups of people and give them a specific, well-defined topic and generate structural variation of ideas. So it's not just bring your favorite idea, but let's look at this topic and try and solve it a bunch of different
And
ways. And
and I also
importantly,
think
yeah, go ahead.
I was also going to say, and I also think, Ryan, um, it's not just about this is about empowering people to come up with the ideas, right, that are going to change your
Absolutely.
organization. I just want
Yes.
to point out stuff like Prime Day at Amazon, the Echo device, which turned into Alexa, the Kindle. These all started from an individual, some of whom were ICs, right, that were pitching and went through this process that Amazon had, which is looks similar to this, right? Although you don't have to do the one Amazon. But I just want to point out it's also how organizations stay ahead. It's how organizations get the next idea, and it's necessary. And that's why good organizations approach change um, in this way, right?
Absolutely. And ideas can come from anywhere. I'm reminded of a consulting client that was in the health insurance industry. Now, this was when we were required to mail certain things like explanation of benefits and coverage and things like that. And a mailroom employee surfaced an idea saying that 10% of our letters are actually going to our own employees. And was able to surface the idea. Now, that person didn't know how to navigate and go through draft and agree, plan, result. We'll talk about these in a little bit. But the process of kicking it off and then getting feedback to pressure test the assumptions and risks to help bolster the business case and show that the ROI was there. A mailroom employee generated a $10 million savings for ending 80% of the mail that gets sent to employees. So ideas can come from anywhere. And if you go back to that in the stadium context, while the high level 20,000 foot view matters, being able to see everything, there's no chance the executive team would see we are sending $10 million of mail to ourselves. That is a marrying up of bottoms up and top down and comes out of enabling employee-led change.
Yeah. And Jonna just said, I'm looking at this chart and think it's essential to identify your influencers, leverage them in this quest. And I think what's
Yes.
going to be, and I want to bring this back to AI. Um, now that everyone has that tool, they have the ability to create a billion ideas. And so it's not just about identifying your influencers, it's also about letting people know that they are influencers. They don't even know it, or that they could be, right? That they have the ability to enact that change. And the reason this is the change that needs to happen is because your organizations needs this. You need to do this to evolve, or else you will not keep up with everyone else, because the pace of change has just dramatically changed, and the
Yeah.
technology that used to be owned at the top, right? Tools from the top down structure, that is all just flipped. So that is why this is more important than ever. It's not a okay to have, it's a must have. But it's also why even this mechanism needs to adapt.
Yeah. Josh, I'm reading Erwin's question. I love it. The weak link for all of this is creating manager accountabilities throughout the management chain. Any suggestions? I completely agree. If you think about how most organizations piece through some version of this process, especially when we get to draft, where um, so when I say draft, I'm talking about crystallizing the idea, identifying the problems we're solving, the approach we're taking. I'm starting to pencil out the business case costs and benefits and who in my organization can validate that information. I'm thinking about stakeholders. These are often key lieutenants of decision makers who have a more strategic purview, not necessarily having their input, but just identifying that they are the right people to engage productively. And when that happens, uh, when I see the best run organizations, they have mechanisms that provide visibility all the way up the chain. So people are rewarded for their engagement and their contributions, not for management and overseeing those ideas.
And
So one more thought, Josh, and then you can jump in. So
yeah,
it's
I want to talk about the PR FAQs because I think it'll actually answer this question.
So managers, when the higher ups know that you have a portfolio of ideas that are coming from you or your team, that becomes part of your job expectation. Everybody, when we're including top to bottom, everybody is part of these change initiatives and change efforts. And so having, I mean, we'll get to a little bit, but the systems that we have developed provide attribution to not only who submits the idea, but who weighs in on the idea. And you can't really fall victim to, well, my boss took the idea and reconfigured it, and now it's his or her idea.
I think the other problem though is my boss just blackballs it. I mean, let's be
It
honest.
doesn't make it
Most
through my boss. I get
most
stuck
people
in that frozen middle.
right. I mean, let's be honest. Most people, and this is not a bad thing, it's just something for us to reflect on. Most of us want to hire people or do hire people who we can coach and who are not as smart as us, or we try to, right? Or the worst managers, perhaps I would say, do that. Um, but the answer here to me is transparency. And it's in the
Absolutely.
brilliance of Amazon's approach to this, which I want to share.
Yeah, please
And I
do.
lived it. The approach there, first of all, is there are no PowerPoints in these sort of things. Everything is written down into a document concisely. One of the benefits, and it's in a specific format I'm going to share, but one of the benefits there is that it's much easier to send a doc, and it's in the culture to create these documents, but it's much easier to send a document written out essay sort of thing to a bunch of people, including your manager and your step level or whomever, or to an entire group to read, rather than say, I have an idea, let me pitch you on it with a PowerPoint in this, because it's already written out. And the practice of writing itself requires the metacognitive work. And fortunately, by the way, with AI, we can work through that much quicker, which is why this is going to be a thing. So let me explain the process. Everything's written and you learn a few different formats, but essentially there is a major format that is used for ideas and for raising them. It's called a PR FAQ, which stands for press release FAQ. Sometimes it's referred to as like a 1-pager or 2-pager, but usually not. The idea there is that you are working backwards. And the pitch is that someone will write out a press release of what it is that they are creating whenever that is released. So, this might say, today is November 12th, 2026. Today, right, we are launching this feature into blah, 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 or we are launching this new process into our company that will do whatever. And the idea there is to say, here is what this is going to look like um, when it is launched. Let me set the vision. Let me show you a picture of the house. It also requires you to think through things and get very specific and concise, because a press release is public facing. So that is a mechanism to help you pitch and think about the idea. The second part of that mechanism in the pitch is the FAQ, where you write frequently asked questions, which is an easy format to write from the customer point of view. So where would I buy this? How much would it be? How will this affect me? Whatever. And from the internal point of view. Essentially, how will we build this? How much will it cost us? Blah, blah, blah. Once you've written that, you go to what is in this is called a draft area. And what I want to point out is during draft and agree, this can take a long time and sometimes is impossible to move past. And the reason is the process for getting to agreement is socializing the document and refining it. And imagine the last time you wrote an essay and you gave it off to someone, right? So you go into a room with the document printed off in the center of the room, and everyone reads it in real time, um, in silence for 10 minutes, marking up your document, and then they give you feedback. And as you can imagine, you do this sometimes in team groups, sometimes you're doing it with an individual. There's no pre-reads. You can go through 50 to 100 revisions, right? Because every time they're writing everything, you get those, you're revising, you're trying to meet things. Sometimes you also run into political issues. Someone really needs something in active voice, or else they won't even read it. And so one of the reason this works is it goes through so many iterations that by the time it gets to agreement, the plan is already sort of made, and so they can run. The problem is this takes a lot of time and gets stuck. And in a world where now we are enabling individuals to have a million ideas, that mechanism, I'm guessing, is going to begin to evolve. And I think all of us need to jump past that, you know? So that's what I would say, Ryan. And there's sort of an overview. And I'm noticing, by the way, we have 13 minutes. So
Yeah. Well, I completely agree. And for Amazon, having the PRFAQ is the right mechanism for them as they're thinking about rolling out new products. We've seen a lot of other templates that work. Companies often have like a capital expenditure process that probably mirrors this the best. But like you said, once people and organizations get into the draft and agree phase, that is where great ideas go to die. And they get stuck. People lose enthusiasm and momentum, and it's hard to sustain it. So, especially if you think about, when we think about this, we have spent the last 20 years helping organizations solve this mechanism question and problem. And how do you get through the draft and agree phases with as little brain damage as possible and capturing as much value as possible? And that requires everyone, bottom to top, knowing what their roles are. It's about empowering, it's about setting expectations, and that comes with the expectations that everybody's participating. But obviously, you don't have to start with your whole organization. This is scalable from teams, divisions, and so on. But people get stuck because, like we said, people with ideas often don't know how to build out the business cases. They don't know who to engage to validate information. They don't know which stakeholders are going to kill ideas because of whatever's buried in the closet, right? Or hidden in the closet. And getting to the agreement, if you can even get the decision makers to say, okay, here's the remaining homework that we need to finish, getting over the hump and then finalizing metrics and milestones, that FAQ section, it's significant. So this to us is a build versus buy decision. How can you absorb, going back to our question, how can you absorb the change that AI presents at the volume it presents and empower your people? We believe the solution, at least what we've developed for our clients and what we've seen, is process and technology driven, right? To accomplish some of the questions that were surfaced earlier, right? We have to grow capabilities for people who don't have them and can't wait for experience. So there's process-based assets. On the technology side, this is how you can actually enable decision makers to see the breadth of opportunities and how you can prevent a single manager from, freezing everything and having it go into the black hole. I think,
yeah.
Josh, I
So
would love your thoughts here because
yeah.
this is
So
super important where we're at.
yeah. So all of this being said, right? Lots of change, lots of ideas. I want you to now just reflect on this moment and the speed. And if today I asked you, what's your internet strategy? I think you would look at me like I'm crazy. Because what do you mean? I don't need a strategy. We use it. Now, someone pointed out to me once, well, we did have a strategy when the internet came out. But then I responded, right? That took 10, 15 years for everyone to get the internet, right? T1 lines, T3 lines. dial-up, the email, social web crawler, right? All these things, that'll happen immediately with AI. So I'd like folks to think less about what is your AI strategy and more about what is the mechanism you're going to use, um, and what is the framework you're going to set up for freedom within that. Because this is the same thing. People right now use internet, you shut off certain websites, you do stuff, you've created a policy around it. It's not a tool in that way. It's changed the entire landscape. And so, Ryan, I think if you want to go to the next slide here, what we want to share, right, is you got to use this thing. That should be your strategy, right? Now, the framework, how are you going to set that up? I think there are 4 things you can do immediately after this. And Brian, I'm just going to share these if
Yeah,
that's cool.
that's
But the
cool.
first is go schedule a meeting now with your team and have an open discussion about AI. Who's using it for personal? Who's using it for whatever? How can I help you use it? How can I help you use AI? And the reason for that is that if you look at the next one, you have to drive AI adoption because the worst AI you're ever going to use is the one you're using today. And the longer you wait, the further behind you are. Not only that, but all that stuff about the Gen Z and whatever, you're not going to be able to hire or keep your best talent who enjoy using AI and the AI tools if you do not embrace it. I want to point out, by the way, some pro tips at the bottom. Invite Ryan and I to your meeting if you would like. We are offering we've set aside some complimentary 90-minute sort of discussion strategy sessions to consult on this. We just love talking about it, so it's actually an easy offer for us. On the driving AI adoption, set guardrails with your team, with your organization, whatever it is. So even if that guardrail is don't use it internally, but everyone needs to use it, use it personally for something. There are use cases, personal development, the coaching. There are use cases for this that don't involve things that are specifically related to your day-to-day tasks. It's also important to start this skill of writing business cases, and it's important to start cultivating a world and an environment where it's expected, it's enjoyed, and it's risk-free. I love, Ryan, your sort of approach. It's an exercise almost, which is build small business cases essentially by writing a 140 character tweet, add the value, right? It's going to bring, or the maybe value, the proposed value, put the proposed risk, and that's a business case that you can start with.
Yeah, and what that looks like practically for Josh's idea about using AI personally for coaching would look something like this. Like you can imagine saying this to a colleague or your boss. I've got a high value, low risk idea to use ChatGPT as a personal coach to help me prepare for our weekly sales meeting. Period.
Yeah,
That is literally the beginning of your business case or your business case version 1.
I love it. And talking about business cases, your first business case is just using it. And the thing is, this is easy to use. And I really just add that. Forget any cognitive load of how to prompt, how to do anything, doing it right, doing it wrong. Think about this as digital photography. I would never, right? If I still was using like film, I probably would never take any film, any actual pictures because I would be worried they wouldn't come out well. I'd let my wife do it. I take a million now, and I don't even worry about deleting them. Just say hi to AI and just talk to it and ask it. And if you have set guardrails with your team by having a meeting with them, and you start talking to AI, so maybe this is out of order, Ryan, business cases will begin to surface.
They will flow.
Not only business cases, prototypes and business cases, actual working prototypes, because now everyone can build. So with that, we really appreciate the time. This is a QR code to my information, I think, Ryan, is that the QR code that I gave you? I'm not sure.
This is a QR code to book a
A meeting.
complimentary 90
Perfect.
minute exploratory session that Josh and I are happy to join.
Yeah. And if you want, I'm just saying, if you don't want to book that now, Kristen's about to end this and you'll get an invite, a poll. And if you click yes on that, we will also get that. I also highly recommend connecting with me and with Ryan on LinkedIn because we post a lot of stuff there. I personally speak probably at least once or twice a week. And so if you need more information on these topics and you want to just keep digging in, this is great. Finally, you will also get after this, not just an email with resources, but I will send you an email with a agent, an AI personal assistant that will be trained on this material to help you continue to put it into practice. Kristen, Ryan, thank you, Ryan, for joining us, by the way, and for joining me. Kristen, I'll pass it back to you to
Basically, you
close
guys
this out.
have said all the wonderful things, and I'm just here to say thank you to each and every person who attended this webinar or is watching this webinar right now, because we will be sending you a copy of the recording after everything is all said and done and all the resources. And please fill out the survey, as Josh said at the end, and we will see exactly how fast we can get you on Josh's and Ryan's calendar. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.